This
the
conference
publisher
will
of the
now
book
be
Know Your
recorded.
Ships for about the last 35 years. The book started back in 1959. I took it over in 1995, so it comes out every spring, the Know Your Ships book. I grew up here in lovely Sault Ste. Marie on the waterfront, watching the boats go by as a kid, and I went into the newspaper business and wound up writing a lot about boats. So that was pretty cool. So last year, myself and a friend took a trip on the Victory 2, operated by Victory Cruise Lines, and our trip was in August, and it went from Detroit to Montreal with stops along the way. And you're going to see some of that. But first, I want to give you a little bit of a brief history of passenger travel on the Great Lakes. It's nothing new, although it did go away for a while. Early schooners and steamships transported goods, people, even cattle as immigrants arrived in this country at Ellis Island and other places and headed west to build their lives in the growing New World. So one of these was this vessel, the Walk in the Water. Was the first steamer to arrive in Detroit in 1918. It startled the locals. Can you imagine a steam whistle and that smoke belching stack? Now, a century ago, before there were good roads and railroads linking many of the cities around the Great Lakes, there was a flotilla, hundreds of these small passenger ships that provided the links between those distant towns, and they linked up with the railroads. One such service was provided by the Canadian Pacific Railroad. The very early steamers in the late 1800s, the Algoma, the Alberta, and the Athabasca. There's the Alberta coming out of the Soo Locks. And the stunning and striking thing about this picture are there are people fishing at the locks. That would be the Wheatza Lock there. And here we have the Algoma on an icy day, and she foundered in a big storm on Lake Superior on Isle Royal. Yeah, that was in 1883, and 44 people were killed in that. So you see that in the inset. By around the turn of the century, around 1900 or so, several fleets of very luxurious overnight passenger steamers were plying the waters of the Great Lakes, the lower lakes especially, between cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, Toronto. Uh, these ships were very elegant. They were the rivals of anything that you could find on the ocean. Just beautiful inside. Railroad tycoon James J. Hill, his nickname was the Empire Builder. He built two ships, the Northwest and the Northland. You're seeing the Northland here, for his Northern Navigation Company. They operated 7-day round trip cruises between Buffalo and Duluth. Can you imagine these huge ships and just beautifully appointed vessels? They didn't really start thinking about cruises as being for leisure until maybe around 1900 or so, a little bit before. Uh, and a lot of these smaller vessels, they would travel between the resorts and the hotels, especially in northern Michigan, which was away from the polluted cities, the hot cities in the summertime. Before trains and cars, the summer hotels like the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island and cottage resorts at Harbor Beach and Petoskey, they all had regular steamship service. So in 1898, the fare was $5 to go up there, which would be about $64 today. But you had to pay extra for food and a room. And the passenger ships, here's the Manitou, by the way. You can tell it says it offers service to Mackinac Island and the Sioux, Chicago, and northern Michigan resorts. One of those ships, this one particular one was popular to charter the ships out sometimes for day cruises. And here's the Eastland in the Chicago River. Unfortunately, it met with a disaster. In fact, the worst loss of life in a shipwreck on the Great Lakes as it rolled over at its dock in the Chicago River in 1915. 844 was the total. Just ignore that headline there. So it had been chartered by the Western Electric Company for a picnic for its employees and their families. So many of those that were lost were women and children. If you take the architectural tour on the river in Chicago, you will leave from the dock where the Eastland rolled over. And I've taken that tour many times, and they do not say you're at the site of the worst disaster on the Great Lakes. There were a lot of passenger companies in the early part of the last century. The Goodrich Transit Company operated on Lake Michigan, and they had the only whaleback passenger steamer, the Christopher Columbus. It was built to run to the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, and after the fair, it sailed right up until the Depression really put a dent in passenger travel. So you could take a day trip for $2 around 1910 or so from Chicago to Milwaukee and back. Wow, can you imagine? In 1912, the largest sidewheel steamer in the world, the C&B, was built, and its name was based on the initials of the company that owned it, the Cleveland and Buffalo Transportation Company. Although people did say that you had to see it to believe it, so C&B. She could carry 6,000 passengers. 6,000. I'm going to show you some images here of the inside of the C&B, but I'm going to read a little block of text here as I do. So here it is. Passengers boarded through a mahogany paneled lobby with a Tuscan theme. The main dining room, which was aft, extended to the rear of the ship, and it was paneled in mahogany and white enamel. The dining room had alcoves with bays for private dining. There was a banquet room, many private dining rooms. A staircase led to a buffet area. The main dining room was decorated in the style of an old English tavern. What you're seeing right here is the writing room. The vessel featured a main saloon on the promenade deck that extended 400 feet. The area was subdivided into bookshops, flower booths, observation rooms, and a separate writing room for men and for women, and that's what that is. An orchestra played on its own balcony, and the music could be heard in the parlors, the saloon, above in the atrium, and in the ladies' drawing room. On the gallery deck was the ladies' drawing room in Italian Renaissance style with built-in seats, and above on the next deck was an atrium with sleeping rooms. On this image that you're seeing there, I'd like to point out the Pewabic tiles on that back wall there. It looks like it might have been a bar. This is a first-class stateroom. A brochure said that they were very proud that that vessel was equipped with 500 telephones. You can see one on the wall. There's the pilot house. Here we are aboard the C&B. Doesn't that look like fun? I'll make mine a double. $59.50. That's not bad. When World War II came along, the U.S. Navy was in desperate need of ways to train their pilots. So the C&B was converted to an aircraft carrier, and it was called the USS Wolverine. After the war, it was taken to Buffalo and scrapped. One of the best known companies on the Great Lakes was the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company, or the D&C Line. They operated from basically almost 100 years, 1868 to 1951. And they owned the best, nicest, most luxurious floating palaces and ran honeymoon specials. And if you look, there's a banner on the bow, honeymoon cruise, here comes the bride. A color picture of the city of Detroit third passing a freighter. For you boat nerds, that's the Thomas Lynch. In the 1930s or so, late 1930s, the increasing use of the automobile caused passenger numbers to start dropping. However, World War II offered a temporary reprieve, with the ships being reasonably full because gasoline was being rationed and rubber for your tires was hard to get. So people turned to passenger ships once again for their vacations, to travel between cities. By the end of the war, however, revenues fell again, and the D&C Line and most others were doomed. The vessel itself, the City Detroit 3, was dismantled in 1956, but the wooden fittings from its Gothic room were purchased privately, and they are now at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum in Detroit, kind of as a reminder of those glory days of passenger travel. Although the D&C fleet closed up their operations in the 1950s, two companies soldiered on until the mid-60s. The Canadian Pacific Railroad had two Edwardian-era Titanic-like steamers, the Keewatin and the Assiniboia, which ran passenger service between Port McNicoll, Ontario, and Georgian Bay, and you can see the red line of the route there, up to Thunder Bay on Lake Superior until 1965. There's an exterior view of the beautiful Keewatin right at the end of her career. Her dining room, and there's a kind of a detail shot of one of the guest bedrooms. I'm able to present these pictures because the Keewatin was saved from the scrap heap by this gentleman, R.J. Peterson, and the vessel was taken to Saugatuck, Michigan, where it served as a museum ship until recently, and it then went over to its old home port of Port McNicoll, also as a museum ship. However, unfortunately, this year, due to COVID-19, it's closed, and her future right there is somewhat uncertain. The other company was the Chicago, Duluth, and Georgian Bay Line, which started out in business in 1913 with two elegant steamers, the South American and the North American. They ran into the 1960s, and if you look at the brochure on the left, clearly World War II. There's a V for Victory with the stars in it, Victory Vacations, 1944. And if you were a college student, you might even buy a ticket on a college student cruise. They don't make field trips like that anymore. Here's the South American and the St. Lawrence Seaway in her last season of operation. 1967, she ran exclusively cruises down to Expo 67. Here's the North American. It was interesting that the North and South American, a lot of the crew members were students, especially the housekeepers. You can see them there on the middle deck. And there was a little orchestra there. Those were probably students as well. The North American sank. It was being towed out to a new career as a training ship in New York, and it sank in the ocean. Those fleets might have carried on a little bit longer, if not for a tragic event very far from the Great Lakes. In 1956, the passenger liner Yarmouth Castle burned off the coast of Florida, and 67 passengers were lost. The disaster led to the expansion of a ordinance or regulation called the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLAS, which required ships to meet certain safety requirements. It eventually banned passenger ships with wooden cabins. Well, that was the end of the Assiniboia, Keewatin, North and South American right there. They ran a few more years after 1956. They were withdrawn from service. The South American, pictured in Montreal at the left, and it was taken out when it was taken out of service, taken out to the East Coast, and it languished at a shipyard until it basically rotted away and they scrapped it. Some operators did try their hands in the overnight cruise market on the lakes in the 60s and the 70s and 80s with pretty limited success. Here's the World Discoverer. It was probably a flop because of that green and red color scheme. I'm not quite sure what that was all about. So it was not till the arrival in 1997 of the German passenger ship C. Columbus that overnight cruising really came back to the Great Lakes. And I took one of those, a short 3-day cruise on it in 1997. Interestingly, it docked when we got off at the old Bob Lowe Island dock in Detroit, where the Bob Lowe day steamers used to run from. I took my mom with me, so up in the upper right corner, we're at our lifeboat drill, proudly wearing our lovely orange life jackets. The current situation on the Great Lakes, well, currently, like 2020, there is no passenger travel on the Great Lakes because of COVID-19. And here's the Victory One, taken a couple of years ago at the Soo by Victory Cruise Lines. Since the Columbus came in, there have been several successful ocean-based companies that have come in. LeLievre, which was a French ship, was in. The Pearl Mist is would be currently running on the Great Lakes. And of course, the U.S.-owned Victory Cruise Lines. So here we're going to make a segue here. We're going to go into the trip on the Victory 2 from last year. We left from Detroit, and here's our itinerary. So pretty self-explanatory. It's a very nice cruise. We left from the beautiful Detroit terminal, and these are new prices for next year, but it's pretty typical. This is our cabin that we had, basically, and it was cozy, I will give it that. There's it's an outside cabin, and there is no opening windows. Now you see this price here, which was almost $6,000. However, they, if you looked on their website, the prices for all these cruises was slashed, and they were half of that. So I'm not sure if their cabins weren't selling or they were trying to build business up, but anyway, the rooms could be had for much cheaper. Here's a little video footage here at Detroit Renaissance Center and the very nice Port Detroit terminal building that they have there. And then the Victory 1 is awaiting my arrival. Oops, not what I want to do. Oh, there we go. Welcome to the Port of Detroit, sailing to the Port of Cleveland. We're tied up in Detroit, that's Windsor across the way, and our sister ship, the Victory 1, was tied up there, and so was the Pearl Mist. So there were 3 cruise boats tied up in Detroit at one time, which certainly had not been seen in decades. And the Detroit River all lit up from the vessel. So now we're going to take a look at the ship itself. And this is our stateroom. I might add that the Victory 1 and the Victory 2 were built in the U.S., and they were meant for the Great Lakes and Seaway trade. And they were doing pretty well. They had just started business when 9/11 happened, and that killed the tourist industry for quite some time. And the vessels sat in layup and bounced around among a number of owners for a while till Victory Cruise Lines picked them up. So here's our little stateroom. You're not going to throw a party in there, but the thought is that maybe you're not in there a lot, and we weren't. So we have a little desk, writing desk here, and they replenish the water every day, and we had a TV. And off to the right-hand side there would be the bathroom, which is not in this photo. The lobby of the ship, when you come in, this is where you would surrender your passport and get your room key. An old-fashioned, actual, honest-to-God purser's desk. The Compass Lounge was a meeting place amidships that was very, very popular. This is where the lectures were held. This is where in the evening they had the ship's three-man band would perform and people would dance. You come in and have your afternoon tea in here. Just a very nice, relaxing room. This is the adjoining tavern. I might add on a Victory Cruise Line, all the drinks are included in your ticket price. That's not always the case on some of the ocean cruise lines. Coastal dining room. There are two options for dining on the Victory Cruise Lines. One is more formal. It's the coastal dining room. The other is less formal. So we'll take a look at the coastal here. So it's in the stern of the ship, so there's beautiful views, and you will notice it's very nice, but there's no one here in a suit and tie. And when they say it's more formal, they just mean a little dressier than, you can't wear your swimsuit suit in here, of course, but it's not like some of the ocean ships where you have to have a suit and tie in a certain dining room on a certain night. Very relaxed. The informal dining room is the grill, which I really enjoyed. That was a buffet kind of affair where you served yourself. And these are tables in the grill. In fact, these are our favorite tables. So the formal dining room, here's a bit of a selection of the menu, and you'll need to ignore some of the misspellings, although I often wondered what candied walnuts would be. Perhaps they told the truth. Again, the more formal dining room. So you would know what you were getting into. They had examples of all their main courses for that night all lined up out on the lobby there, and people could walk by and take a look first. This was good. There was a lot of venison packed into that little pie. Dessert. Creme brulee. And here's a little onboard happiness. Small ship, small crew, very personal. You really got to know people very well on the Victory boats. This is back up at the buffet for breakfast. So you have lots of choices, as you can see. I became a fan of mucilix. There was always prime rib up in that informal dining room, and there were some incredible soups, just delicious soups. I had a lot of prime rib. The upper deck for sunning. And one of my favorite spaces on the upper deck was this little patio, enclosed patio. And some comfortable chairs up front for viewing. Such as here, we're going into Lock 8 of the Welland Canal. I was standing up on the deck, and I struck up a conversation with a woman that was up there. We talked for quite some time, and it sounded like she made many trips on the ship. I said, are you a member of the crew? And she said, no, I'm the captain's wife. Oh, so she rode along with them, and she kind of did some unofficial hosting of things. So I said to her, wow, since you're the captain's wife, can you get me a tour of the pilot house? And she said, well, I normally couldn't do that, but we do have a special group coming in a half an hour, so you just go up there and join on to their group. So I did, and there we have the pilot house of the Victory 2 going down the Welland Canal. That's the captain's way over there to the left. That's the helmsman. There's no real steering wheels. It's those things that the helmsman's turning there. that operate the propellers and rudders. So that's very modern pilot house. Oops. You know, uh, so we're going to meet some crew members next, and that's the captain in the middle there. Quite a character. He's from Greece, and one of the things he did, we had a welcoming ceremony. He taught us all the Greek line dance. A very kind gentleman. So here we go. We're going to learn a little dance from him. The guy in the blue shirt is the cruise director. So you see how that works. Uh, this is Megan. That's the shore excursion director. She was a lot of fun. Preston was the head waiter. He's from India. This was the security officer who was from Yugoslavia. Cabin attendant Manuel, and the man never was without a smile. He was so outgoing and friendly. So the spa, I did enjoy a couple of massages here at the spa. She was wonderful. Everybody has a big smile on the Victor too. That was very nice to see. So, of course, the shore excursions are a big part of this whole experience. So this particular photo is in Cleveland. I finally got a chance to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I thought that was cute. It made me want to go back when it wasn't quite as busy. We took a harbor cruise on a good time boat cruise line. So there's a saltwater ship unloading general cargo there. Now here we are, we're tied up in Port Colborne. Almost everybody except me and my traveling companion went to Niagara Falls on buses. But I'd been there and I wanted to stay here and see the boats going through the Welland Canal, so I did. Now here we're going into the Welland Canal, Lock 8 at dusk. Such a beautiful, calm night. The next morning we arrived in Toronto. And again, we seem to be shadowing our sister ship, the Victory 1, so she's right there in front of us. So we decided to take the Toronto City tour by bus. It had been a long time since I was in Toronto, and they've really done some very interesting things. I particularly like this installation here. It's called Into the Clouds. Very whimsical. After we left Toronto, we were headed down through the Thousand Islands area of the St. Lawrence Seaway. If you've never been here, this is an absolutely stunning area. Many, many beautiful homes and a couple of castles, Singer Castle and Bolt Castle. I'm not quite sure which one this is. It's one of the two. There are many tiny islands dotted through this region, which gives it its name. So here's a little cottage on a little piece of land. This is Crossover Island. There's a lighthouse here on the end. I believe that's Bolt Castle. When you're transiting the seaway, you go underneath a lot of these railroad bridges, which date back to the middle of the 20th century. Very quaint, very European looking. So you can hear the wind of our passage as we go underneath. We make it to Quebec City. My third visit to Quebec City, and I would go back there anytime you ask me to. Up on top there is the landmark Chateau Frontenac, and the cruise ship Louis Joliet is moored down here. And I had wanted to go on a harbor cruise on her, and so we did that this time. Another view of the Chateau Frontenac. You can just go there for tea. It's wonderful. Quebec City is in two levels, and if you're at the harbor, the dock level, and you want to get up to the upper level where the Chateau Frontenac is, you could walk a million steps, or you could take the funicular. I love the funicular. I love the word funicular. It's so much fun to go up to pay a couple bucks and ride up there to the top. Again, a very European concept. There's a car going down, we're going up. And we get up to the top. Statue of Samuel de Champlain, the early French explorer. The musicians singing Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. And then here we are at the Frontenac.
It's even one of the collections.
Look at those gardens. That's just delightful. Absolutely delightful place. In the evening, we had fireworks. I thought it was just for us, but apparently they do that every Thursday night or something. But they were spectacular. They're like you'd see in a big city. There were Notre Dame Church. This beautiful Samuel de Champlain statue. I got off the boat and I was wandering down the waterfront and I ran across this monument to the sailors who died in World War II. Lots of vessel traffic in the Montreal, Quebec City area. And here's the Spruce Glen is coming in, and the John D. Leach is at anchor waiting for a dock. It's a big saltwater tanker in the harbor with the hills behind it there. Another two tankers are loading. We're up on the hill right here. Another absolutely gorgeous place is Montmorency Falls. And we took a tour bus up to there. And you can go right out and you can walk. You can see the little bridge where you can walk across the top of the falls. Now we're going to switch locales. I believe this is Montreal Harbor. If you think you've seen a lot of ships in one place, Montreal is just a boat watcher's paradise. Dock after dock, ship after ship. You just stand at the railing and you take boat pictures. One time I came on deck without my camera, and the steward wondered if I was okay. I didn't have my camera. This tanker has got to have the largest smokestack in the world, biggest one I've ever seen. Lots of messages on the Dubai Beauty. You also see container ships, which is in the background, the Glasgow Express, but you also see a lot of these tugs that are operated by Group Ocean. They're everywhere. They're like little mosquitoes going around the harbor. Got a lovely sunset from the deck of the Victory II. And on that same evening, we were overtaken by a container ship on just a most spectacular night. Look how calm that was. So we're going to look a little bit into the future here for a moment, because cruising on the Great Lakes has become a major developing, growing industry. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Among them is it's safe. The general public perceives North America as being a possibly safer place than Europe or other places. It's also an untapped market for quite some time. And some of these cruises are marketed exclusively to people from Germany or France who really get a kick out of coming over and seeing America's heartland. The Wild West, one of the cruises is billed as a Wild West cruise, and they go up on Lake Superior, which is pretty funny. But until COVID-19 hit, this industry was really on the move. In fact, Sault Ste. Marie, where I'm at, had a schedule of 23 ship visits in 2020, which all got canceled. And I was going to be a shore ambassador for Victory Cruises, in fact, and talk about this area for those folks. So maybe they'll let me do it next year. Once COVID clears up, this is, I assume that this boom is just going to pick right back up. So coming in the future here, this is the Hanseatic Inspiration, owned by Hapag-Lloyd, the same company that brought the C. Columbus in back in 1997. I don't believe that on the Great Lakes we'll be seeing any penguins, but you never know. Viking Cruise Line, the big ocean line, is stepping into the cruise business with these small expedition cruises. And here is the Viking Octanus, which is expected in next year. So there's a lot of shore excursions that are like this, with the Zodiac boat loading there in the back, and they do experiments right alongside scientists. It's as much educational now as it is the lovely experience of cruising. And that is a stateroom on that vessel. These are not cheap. I have not seen the prices, but they're not cheap. Even the Ritz-Carlton folks are getting into this. Here's the Azora. This is expected in soon. Next year, I hope. And this is the question that the cruise lines are asking people. Where will you be? Well, they really would like it if you were with them. The cruise industry has really lost a lot of money out of the COVID situation, so they're going to be looking to build that back up quickly. And I will say that if you book cruises next year or the year after, sometimes you can get some incredible deals. I've booked a Holland America cruise to Hawaii for 2022, and I couldn't resist the perks that you usually have to pay for on that cruise line were all free. So if you're thinking about taking a cruise, this is a great time to start looking into it, for the future. So with that, I'm concluding my program here, and I will open myself up to questions. Michelle?
Roger, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. What kinds of, Erie, Pennsylvania, what kind of draft do you think some of these ships are going to have, like the Viking?
They are very shallow draft vessels, 3 to 4 feet. They can get in very closely to various small ports that you might want to visit. If you can't quite get in, you can always go ashore on the tender. When I was on the Sea Columbus, there was one port that I think it was on Manitoulin Island where we couldn't get in. The boat couldn't get up to the dock, so they just took everybody in on the tender.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Roger, I had a question actually. On that C&B historic boat, they were showing telephones in the room you had in that photo. What did those telephones connect to? Because of course
Oh,
that was well before the age of wireless.
yes, they connected to the other rooms on the boat, so you could call your friends, other passenger rooms. You could order up room service. Pretty much that would be the extent of it.
Okay. And we had a question from Ron. Are there stargazing programs in these Great Lakes cruises? And what other programs would they have?
You know, that's a really good question, and I have read that there are stargazing programs. And if you'll just bear with me for 1 second here, let's see. Great Lakes, and I'll just see if I can't bring something up on here. Looking at the website for the Viking cruises, they're called expedition cruises. So you go on wildlife excursions on shore where you look for bald eagles and bears and beavers, and there's hiking excursions through the forest. You can kayak in Georgian Bay, and you saw that vessel there with the open back where you can bring your kayaks right in and out. Uh, the ship may call it Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. You can do some of that. And there's something on here, and I'm trying to actually find out what it is, but they have scientists, teams of scientists on board conducting research, and you can kind of work with them and see what kind of research they're all doing. Uh, so that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. It's not like everybody gets on a big bus and they go to see the Acropolis or something like that. This is definitely more exploration of pristine lands where people have not been.
And Roger, I had another question for you too. How many passengers are on the Victory?
The Victory cruise boats hold 200 people, but our particular cruise only had 120 passengers.
So that's a little different from those big Caribbean cruises where
Yes.
there's just crowds of people. And
I
then
have.
I had a go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, I've been on the big cruise ships and the Victor too, and I've also been on many freighters. And the difference between those big ocean cruisers and the Great Lakes, like the Victory 2, is because it's so small, it's very intimate. So the guy that's taking your ticket when you get on the boat might also be the guy who's playing drums in the orchestra at night, the band at night, which played every night. And there's another guy might be your bartender, but he's also the guy taking your tickets or taking your passports, and you really get to know people. And they're the musicians. Actually, the rooms are right across the hall from me, and we got to know those guys pretty well. The captain's cabin was right on the main deck there, and you'd see him walking around all the time with his wife, and he ate with the passengers all the time, and he would eat with his crew, and you got to know the captain. My nickname on there was the historian because I told him about the book and I had the camera and I was always taking pictures. So I'd see him in the morning, and in his Greek accent, "How's the historian this morning?" So that was very nice. He had been captain of cruise ships in Europe, the big ones, for many years. And as he's coming down toward the end of his career, he wanted to do something that wasn't quite so stressful, that was a little more pleasurable. So he's a perfect fit for Victory Cruise Lines.
And then
And
I have
also,
another.
people ask me also, do you like cruising on a passenger ship or on a Great Lakes freighter? Which do you prefer? And sometimes I have to come down on the side of the Great Lakes freighter. That's just me.
I was gonna ask you that is how it compared to our own little boats here at home. And I
Yeah.
had another question regarding the luxury of the accommodations because it certainly looked impressive. How do you think it compared to those 20th century cruises in
Oh,
terms of menu and service and
well, the menu and service are right up there. I have a collection of many menus from the Great Lakes passenger steamers in their heyday, and they were outstanding then, and those cruise ships on the Great Lakes are just as outstanding now. But the architecture, like anything else, buildings or what have you, the architecture is just not as elegant and detailed as it was back in the 20s or 30s. One thing would be the expense, and it's really hard to get a craftsman to make all that beautiful woodwork. Very expensive. So uh, I would kind of say it's kind of like a nice hotel,
Mhm.
which is fine. Part of the
Maybe not
experience.
quite as palatial.
Yeah, not quite as palatial, but it's very nice, very functional, and I will have to say impeccably clean. And for folks who are concerned about germs, uh, last year there was a Purell station everywhere, many Purell stations. I bet next year will be even more of them.
We
And
had another question come in, Roger, and if you don't have the details on this one, I could probably help you out.
yeah,
How could the Eastland disaster have been prevented?
the Eastland disaster was caused um, by two things. One was improper ballasting of the vessel at the dock, and the other thing was that to see a ship that was passing by on the water side, everyone ran to one side at one time, and because the ship was improperly ballasted, it rolled over, and they couldn't do anything about it. So what could be done to prevent it? Pay attention to duty. You know, ballast the ship. I believe the engineer may have uh, been arrested, and I'm not sure if he went to jail or not. But
It was a terrible situation, and I'm going to give you even a little more backstory, more than you ever wanted to know about the Eastland. Um, it was actually an indirect effect of the Titanic sinking. The
yes,
they changed the laws that they had to have a seat in a lifeboat for every single passenger. In the past, they'd always figured that if anything made a ship sink, it'd be so catastrophic that all of the passengers would not be alive. Well, so to retrofit the Eastland, which was built before the Titanic, they had to add a lot of concrete to its decks, and that changed its center of gravity. Now, the how you operate your ballast tanks is, of course, affected by where your center of gravity is. And no one had ever reassessed after adding, you know, thousands and thousands of pounds of concrete to the upper decks of this vessel that its center of gravity had shifted. So the engineer is actually working with the original, engineering dimensions and center of gravity that vessel had. So by adding all those lifeboats and the superstructure to support them, they made that boat top heavy. So in many ways, it was an accident waiting to happen. And I will plug wonderful book about the Eastland by George Hilton, and he goes into a great deal of depth about that. So I'm sorry to take that over from you, Roger, but
well,
that was
that's
one of
okay.
my grad school
Uh,
projects.
well, also they added a lot of lifeboats topside, and
Right.
the lifeboats did not help that situation either.
No, the concrete to hold the lifeboats and then the lifeboats themselves, it was a bad situation.
Yeah.
Kind of
I
made
might,
just not thinking through that, any change to a vessel of that scope is going to change how it operates. We had
I might
another question. Oh, sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
I might add that the Eastland was salvaged and it was repaired and it served many years as the U.S. Navy training ship Wilmette before it
Yep.
was eventually scrapped.
Will these companies and their shops survive the downtown or the downturn from this
Uh,
year?
I assume he meant ships. Uh, yeah, probably. The Victory Cruise Line is actually owned by the American Steamboat Management Company, I think. They offer the cruises down the Mississippi River. They're a very large company with pretty deep pockets, and I think they'll probably survive okay. One company has already gone out of business, which was Blount uh, Adventure Cruises. They were a pioneer in the small ship cruising industry. They had three ships, two of which often came into the Great Lakes. The Grand Mariner was one of them. The Grand Caribe was another, and they've recently announced that they're not going to be coming back due to COVID.
And a related question I accidentally passed up is: were there any cruises this summer, or were they
No,
all canceled due to COVID?
everything was canceled due to COVID and also because the U.S. Canadian border is closed. So very hard for Canadians to come over. The cruise ships go to Canada. They go to the U.S. ports back and forth. It would be impossible to have shore excursions. And also, Canada banned the operation of cruise ships of a certain capacity. Uh, and I think that ban is still in effect. That would affect more like the bigger ships coming into Quebec from the ocean, not the Victory Cruise Line boats, but the other problems were just insurmountable this year. Hopefully, the border will reopen by the time next year rolls around, and it can happen again.
And Mike wanted to know, can you comment about the stability and the comforts between freighters and cruise ships? You've already told us your favorite, so now we want to nail you down on how the two compare.
Well, it's like apples and oranges, I think. A freighter is really not meant to be a cruise ship, so the amenities might be uh, different. Now, depends on your Great Lakes ship. I've had trips on the Wilfred Sykes, built in 1949, and the Edward L. Ryerson from 1959, and the accommodations on those two vessels are stellar. They were meant to be uh, impressive. They were used to entertain guests of the company, and everything was first class, including the separate stewards and what have you, and white jacketed waiters and what have you. Then, I've been on the Stuart J. Court, the first 1,000-footer, which was built without any guest quarters at all. So when I go on the court, I have to sleep in a spare bedroom that a crew member would use, like maybe a technician. I don't care because I'm on a boat, so what the heck? Uh, and on the passenger ships, of course, there's somebody turning your bed down every night and making little animals out of towels. You don't have that on a Great Lakes freighter, so apples and oranges, different people. But as I said, the food on a freighter or on a passenger ship, very comparable. The freighters I've been on, the menu has been stellar.
And how about the stability in terms of like rough weather or
Ah, on the cruise ships, I didn't get in any rough weather to say, but they do have stabilizers. Now on the Sea Columbus, when my mom and I took that cruise, we were coming down across the top of Georgian Bay, going down into Lake Huron, and we hit a storm came at us from the northwest, and we were rolling. And I was told the dishes were flying out of the cupboards in the galley. And that was a pretty rough trip. That's probably the roughest ride I've ever been on a vessel. And you couldn't sleep because every time the ship rolled, the way the waves were oriented, you'd hit your head on the bulkhead. You'd kind of slide down and hit your head. So that was kind of a rough night. On the Great Lakes, I've never been in any huge storms, but those big freighters are pretty darn stable too. On the Stuart J. Court, you're going through 16-foot waves and you kind of hardly don't notice.
all right, I think we have run through all of the questions.
Wonderful.
And I want to thank Roger, one of my favorite friends, who is also a board member of the Sioux Locks Visitor Center Association. So hats off. And of course, the author of one of the most important books to many of us on the Great Lakes.